We've all heard this idea tossed around in geopolitical debates, right? The idea that a coordinated US and Israeli military strike on Iran could just be this quick, clean operation that magically results in swift regime change. Well, when we actually dig into the data, the intelligence reports, and the hard realities on the ground, a totally different picture emerges. So in today's Explainer, we are literally dismantling that myth. We're going to look at exactly why it makes zero strategic sense for Israel and the US to wage a conventional war against an Iran that is deeply, heavily backed, technologically, economically, and politically by China. And this really brings us to a central, kind of provocative question. Can you bomb a country into democracy? I mean, it sounds totally counterintuitive on its face, doesn't it? And while, as historical data clearly shows, forced regime change from the outside, especially when you're relying on aerial bombardment, creates this absolutely devastating paradox. To really understand why this strategy fails, we first need to take a step back and look at what the US and Israel are actually trying to achieve here. The strategic goals are pretty straightforward. 1. Eliminate the current Iranian regime. 2. Stop that regime's ongoing support for Palestinian and regional proxy groups, like Hamas and Hezbollah. And 3. Achieve all of this with minimal casualties to Western and Israeli forces. Okay, so that's the expectation. But the reality? It hits a massive geopolitical brick wall.
And that brick wall is China. What's truly fascinating about this is the asymmetric nature of their partnership. See, Iran is incredibly dependent on Beijing just to survive its international isolation. China, on the other hand, they empower Iran as part of a really calculated, cautious strategy. Beijing absolutely does not want direct military involvement, but they are more than happy to provide immense political and economic shielding to counter U.S. influence in the Middle East.
Just think about the sheer scale of this economic lifeline. Right now, Chinese purchases account for roughly 90% of Iran's exported oil. 90%. That pumps tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue straight to the Iranian government. So when the West applies maximum economic pressure or slaps on heavy sanctions to weaken the regime, China just keeps buying, effectively insulating Tehran. You literally cannot economically starve a regime when the world's second-largest economy is eagerly buying up almost all of its main export.
But here's the thing. It's not just about oil. Official intelligence briefings and fact sheets detail how China facilitates something way more dangerous to U.S. and Israeli military goals. We're talking about sanctions evasion and secret, dual-use technology transfers. Chinese banks, front companies, intermediary firms, they essentially run a shadow fleet moving Iranian oil, and in return, they funnel highly controlled technologies right into Iran's military apparatus.
And the exact type of tech being transferred is absolutely crucial here. China is giving Iran access to their Beidou satellite network, which means Iran gets real-time tracking of U.S. troop movements. They're handing over advanced electronic warfare suites that can jam U.S. and Israeli precision munitions. They've got YLC-8E radar tech that can actually detect advanced stealth fighters like the F-35. They even supply sodium perchlorate. That's a critical chemical for solid missile propellant. This kind of backing completely transforms Iran from a low-tech adversary into a highly lethal networked threat. And what does that mean? It guarantees heavy U.S. and Israeli casualties, instantly failing that core strategic goal we talked about a minute ago.
Because of this deep Chinese economic backing and the massive influx of high-tech defense capabilities, a conventional war is not going to be quick, and it definitely won't be clean. Israel and the U.S. simply won't achieve their goals of a swift regime collapse or an immediate end to proxy support. Sure, the U.S. and Israel might hold tactical superiority, but Chinese support ensures Iran remains strategically resilient. It just turns into a brutal, exhausting stalemate.
So you have to ask yourself, what actually happens when a quick military victory is completely off the table? Well, military history shows us that when frustration mounts and a war drags on, there's a really dangerous shift. Armies pivot toward using overwhelming, far less precise force to try and just break the enemy's will. Which leads us to a highly controversial, devastating tactic.
We really need to look at the strict definition of carpet bombing, or area bombardment. Under the Geneva Conventions, it's defined as an attack that treats a bunch of clearly separated military objectives located in a populated city or town as a single target. Basically, it's the act of dropping unguided munitions to completely obliterate a wide area, indiscriminately mixing military targets with everyday civilian centers.
And let's be absolutely crystal clear on this point, skipping the political spin. Area bombardment of civilian centers violently breaks the foundational legal principles of distinction and proportionality. Under international humanitarian law, carpet bombing is an undeniable war crime, period. If a military resorts to surface bombing populated areas just to collapse a regime's infrastructure, they are committing a grave breach of international law.
Now, why is this specific legal and moral distinction so incredibly critical when we talk about Iran? Get a load of this number, 80%. Intelligence estimates, highlighted by folks like Israel's late veteran diplomat Yuri Lubrani, suggest that at least 80% of the Iranian population actually wants the clerical regime gone. They actively desire a secular, democratic transformation. The people of Iran themselves are the single greatest potential asset for anyone wanting regime change.
But here is the massive psychological paradox, and Lubrani captured it perfectly. He said, any military action will only rally the Iranian people, a proud people with a developed national consciousness, around the regime. Bombing civilian centers doesn't spark some glorious democratic uprising. It triggers an immediate, deeply ingrained nationalist consolidation. The second bombs start falling on cities, that domestic desire for regime change is completely overshadowed by the basic human need to defend the homeland.
And this is a point we really need to pay attention to. Because of that, the whole liberator narrative completely evaporates. The carpet bombing of a population makes it absolutely impossible for anyone to believe that Israel and the US are actually there to help the Iranian people achieve freedom. You cannot claim to be a liberator while committing war crimes against the exact same civilians you claim to be freeing. The entire strategy totally defeats its own political purpose.
Let's play devil's advocate. Say a military campaign actually does succeed in breaking the government. What then? Well, history gives us the pretty grim anatomy of forced regime change. Step 1, the total destruction of physical and social infrastructure. Step 2, the collapse of any central authority. Step 3, the balkanization of the country and a horrific civil war. Bombing a country's infrastructure to dust doesn't magically sprout a democracy, you know? It creates a massive, highly dangerous vacuum.
And that vacuum quickly turns into a geopolitical black hole. Without a pre-existing, deeply rooted democratic infrastructure ready to seamlessly take over, no stable pro-Western alternative is going to emerge. Instead, you're going to see the rise of even more radical, totally uncontrollable militias, meaning the actual threat to Israel and the US goes up, not down. Global energy markets would be completely destabilized, and ultimately, you just end up forging a newly unified, hardened Iranian front against the West.
So, when we pull it all together, we really have to contrast the myth with the reality. The myth promises this quick liberation, a super grateful public, and a clean, easy end to proxy support. But the reality, grounded in China's immense economic and technological shielding, the resilience of the Iranian military, and the undeniable laws of armed conflict, it promises a brutal war of attrition, massive casualties, totally alienating the public through devastating bombardments, and creating a balkanized failed state.
Which leaves us with this final, really vital question to think about. If the price of dismantling the current regime is an unwinnable war of attrition heavily subsidized by China, the commission of war crimes against everyday civilians, and the birth of a chaotic geopolitical black hole, is a military victory actually worth it?